I feel the need also to say a few words about him. Terry said that he has put $500 million into education and education reform, but he hasn't done it in the typical ways. He has invested in things that he thinks are going to be game changers, things that are going to be innovative, things that are going to be disruptive. And so when I became the chancellor in DC and I came up with this idea that we should have a new teacher's contract that would allow teachers to opt out of the tenure and seniority system and not have those protections, but in exchange, if they were highly effective teachers, they could make twice as much money as they were in the old system. And probably only the man who wrote the book entitled The Art of Being Unreasonable would actually say that that was a good idea. So he helped to fund that contract. I think it is a model for the rest of the country now. When I left DC and told him that my next endeavor was to try to take on the entrenched political interests that were stopping us from being able to put the right policies in place, he once again said, okay, I'm in. So he really is, I think, the reason why I am here today in many ways, and why the education reform movement is at an important point in this country. And one of the things I want to sort of preface this talk in saying is that we have to focus on education in this country right now. With all of the talk about jobs and the economy, which should be top of mind for everyone, the thing that is missing in those conversations about stimulus packages and bailout plans and higher taxes is the fact that we are not going to be able to compete in the global marketplace in the long term until we fix our public education system. A recent survey showed that 50% of employers reported recently that they could not find applicants or candidates who had the skills and knowledge that they needed to fill mission-critical jobs. With today's unemployment rates, it makes absolutely no sense that we have employers who are saying, I can't fill most of my jobs. There's a huge disconnect, and it is a disconnect that can only be solved by ensuring that we have a high-quality public education system. So I'm going to talk today about what I think the things are that we have to do to change the trajectory of our country as it pertains to education. But before I get into that, I want to talk a little bit about my experiences and sort of what has led me to where I am now and the stances that I've taken. And essentially, all of that started in 2006, when a young upstart politician named Adrian Fenty, who nobody in Washington, D.C. knew, decided that he was going to run for mayor. And he didn't get any endorsements, and he didn't participate in the debates, and didn't raise a whole lot of money, and he didn't think he needed to. His philosophy was that he was going to get out into the community and knock on doors and talk to people. And legend has it that he knocked on half of the doors in the city. He was right. He, in 2006, was elected the youngest mayor ever to be elected into that office in DC, but he was also the only mayor ever to be elected winning every single precinct. And the interesting thing that he said, after having gone through that experience, was that every single household that he went into, it didn't matter if it was in upper Northwest, sort of the affluent parts of the town, or whether it was in the more downtrodden parts of the community, that every living room that he went into, people told him the same thing: you've got to fix the schools. You have to fix the school system. So as his first act as mayor, once he was elected, he decided to take over mayoral control of the schools, because he was tired of the blame game and everybody sort of pointing fingers at why the school system was so bad. He said, I'm willing to be held accountable. Let me take responsibility. So he got this legislation passed through the city council, and on June 12th of 2007, he took over the school system, and as his first act, decided to introduce me as the city's first schools chancellor. Now, as Mr. Broad said, I was a 37-year-old Korean girl from Toledo, Ohio, who had never run a school, much less a school district. And I was the diametric opposite of what people both wanted and expected in a schools chancellor. So the city was absolutely abuzz and aghast at the choice. And the overarching sentiment in the city was, what on God's green earth was Adrian Fenty thinking? And that's pretty much what I was thinking in my first few days in office, as I was sitting there faced with this situation where essentially I was tasked with trying to fix the lowest performing and most dysfunctional school district in the country. Not an easy task. And just to give you a sense of what that meant, in our city, we had an achievement gap between where our white students were performing and where our African American students were performing, a gap of 70 percentage points. If you were a ninth grader entering into the city's schools, your likelihood of graduating from college was 9%. And of all of the eighth graders in the city schools, only 8% of them were operating on grade level in mathematics. 8%. Means 92% of our kids did not have the skills and knowledge necessary to be productive members of society. That was the situation that we were facing. So when you've got a system that almost everything is going wrong and it's hard to figure out where to start. But I was lucky in that I had a number of people all throughout the city who had watched the school system sort of deteriorate over time, had lots of good ideas, and I met with as many of those people as I could. And the overarching sentiment that people gave was, you have to figure out where all the money is going. And this was an interesting piece because in Washington, D.C., we were spending almost more money per kid than any other jurisdiction in the entire country, $17,000 per kid per year. And yet our results were as bad as they were. So the sort of old, adage that what we need in order to fix the system is more money, this was the proof point of why more money didn't necessarily result in better outcomes. So I thought, well, this makes sense, so I'm gonna go figure out where all the money is, and I gathered my staff together and I said, find out why we are getting such a bad return on investment. So about 2 weeks after I gave them that charge, my special assistant came back to me, sat me down, and he said, okay, I did exactly what you said. I looked through all of the spreadsheets and the budgets, and I tried to look for the largest line items, trying to figure out where we're spending this money. And he said, and I found two very interesting things. Now, for those of you who don't know, in education speak, interesting is a euphemism for whack. So I knew I was in for something good. So he says, the first thing that I found is that we are spending more than $80 million a year transporting a few thousand special education kids to their school sites. And I did the quick back of the envelope math, and it equaled about $18,000 a year per kid, and I thought, well, this doesn't make any sense. I mean, for $18,000 a year, you could buy the kid a Saturn the first year and hire a personal chauffeur for the Saturn every year after that, right? So I said, you know what, I don't know anything about running bus routes, but I know I can do it for cheaper than $18,000 a year. This is actually good news because we're gonna fix the busing system and then we're gonna take that money and we're gonna put it into the classroom where it belongs. And he said, actually, you can't do that. He said, the reason why it costs so much is because we had done such a poor job of transporting these special needs kids in the past that now we are under a court order, a consent decree, and there's a court-appointed special master who is now responsible for running the bus system. And he is allowed to spend as much money as he wants as long as he gets the kids to school on time, and all we can do is pay the bill at the end of the day. We have no ability to control costs. And I looked at him and I said, that is the craziest thing I have ever heard. And he said, you only think that because you have not heard item number 2. He says to me, I'm trying to figure out where are all these children going? The city is only a few square miles wide and deep. Even if the buses were running circles around the city all day, I don't think you could burn enough gas to actually equal $18,000 a year. He said, so I'm looking into where the children are going. He said, and what I found out was fascinating. He said, not only have we been doing a poor job of transporting our kids, our special needs kids, but we've also done a very, very poor job of educating them. And because of that, the parents have sued the district, and they usually win because they are right. And as a result of that, the courts have, as a remedy, said that the children should attend private schools and that the district is responsible for paying the tuition to the private schools. He said, and these private schools are all over the country. They're in, they're in Virginia, they're in Maryland, Bowie, Baltimore. He said, so imagine this. In the morning, we have a housing complex that has maybe 10 special needs kids who live there. And what happens is 10 different buses line up with 10 different bus drivers and 10 different bus matrons, and one is going to Richmond and one is going to there, and that is what is driving up the costs. So I said, well, I've never heard of a public school system having to pay private school tuition. How does this happen? He said, well, that's the next question I asked. He said, so I looked into it, and he said, I'm just going to give you one example. He said, I found a woman who was just a mid-level employee in the central office of the school district. In 1 week, this woman made 2 mistakes. For one kid, she did not fill out a form she was supposed to fill out. And for another kid, she didn't have a meeting she was supposed to have. And in both of these cases, it resulted in these children getting sent to a private facility that cost this district $227,000 a year in tuition. So I said, I'm gonna have to meet this woman. So my special assistant calls the woman up and says, ma'am, we need you to come to a meeting at the chancellor's office tomorrow at 5 o'clock. And the woman said, well, I'm going to have to check with my supervisor on that. And my assistant said, ma'am, the chancellor is your supervisor. She's everyone's supervisor. And she said, well, fine, I'll come, but I'm gonna bring my lawyer with me. He said, bring whoever you gotta bring, just come to me. So the next day rolls around, I walk into the conference room. I said, so I understand you had a question about whether or not you should attend this meeting. She said, no, I'm sorry, I was just a little freaked out, but I'm good now. I said, great. So I pull out the files. I said, this kid, you didn't fill out the form. This kid, you didn't have the meeting. I said, with these 2 mistakes, you cost this district nearly $500,000. Help me understand how that happened. And she looked at me and she said, well, you need to understand that I am a very busy person. She said, I got a lot of kids on the rolls, I got a lot of meetings to have, a lot of forms to fill. Things are gonna fall through the cracks. That's just the way it is. And I looked at her and I said, no, you need to understand that if you think this job is too big for you, then you need to go find a different job. But if you are going to take the paycheck home every other week, then you have to take personal responsibility for doing everything within your job purview and doing it well. And she looks at me and she said, but that's not fair. I kid you not. And over and over and over again, for those first few weeks, I literally had conversations like that with central office employees all over the district who had absolutely no idea that their job was to be accountable for the children and the teachers and the principals who were working hard in our schools every day. Instead, they clocked it in, clocked it out, fill out a form, don't fill out a form, what does it matter? So I did what I think many CEOs in a turnaround situation like that do. I started to fire people. And that did not go over particularly well. In fact, a couple of days into that, my then general counsel ran into my office and he said to me, Chancellor, you have got to stop firing people. And I said, why? If we have people who can't do the job, then we should get rid of them and we should bring in people who can do the job. And he looked at me and he said, welcome to the DC public schools, where we never fire anyone. And I said, you know what? You are exaggerating. I know this for a fact because I've talked to lots of people in the city and they told me there's a process and I don't want to break any rules, just tell me what the process is so I can do this right. He said, well, there are only 2 ways that you can terminate an employee from the school district. I said, okay, what's the first way? He said, you have to have done something egregious. And I said, well, that is perfect because everyone that I'm talking about is egregiously incompetent. And he said, no, that doesn't count. You either have to have hit a kid and we have to have a videotape to show it because the teacher, 5 teachers and a principal seeing it is not enough. He said, or you have to have stolen money from the district and we essentially have to have the bank receipt to show it. Short of that, nothing counts as egregious. I said, okay, that's not good news. Give me the second way. He said, well, you have to show a recurring pattern of incompetence. And I said, okay, well, these people did not magically become incompetent the moment that I walked in the door. Clearly, we ought to be able to show that there's been a pattern over time. He says, that's what you would think, but what you don't know is that for 10 years, no one in the central office has received a performance evaluation. And in order to meet the legal letter of the law of showing a recurring pattern, you'd have to show documentation, but because we haven't evaluated anyone, we don't have any documentation, so you can't fire anybody that way either. And I said, okay, so what am I supposed to do with these people then? And he said, well, you can do what we normally do. We send them down to the schools. I said, are you kidding me? I'm trying to get these people away from children. I'm not going to put them closer to them. So I made the quick decision that I was going to send some of these people home for a little while. Because think about this. If an employee like this comes into work and in 1 week costs me $500,000, then my best cost-cutting mechanism is to let them stay at home, right? So I went to the mayor and I said, sir, you brought me in to do a difficult job, but the difficult job turns into an impossible job if I can't bring in a team of people who are committed and dedicated and able to take this challenge on. So we introduced legislation to the city council that would allow us to make all central office employees at-will employees. That was Firestorm number 2 in the city. Also did not go over particularly well. But it was interesting to me because throughout that entire process, what kept coming up over and over again was, again, a focus on adults, on job security, on due process, et cetera, and an utter lack of regard for children, for schools, and for student achievement. So that's kind of what we faced in DC on a day-to-day basis, and because of the generosity of people like Eli Broad, we were actually able to significantly turn that school district around. And it is because of that reason that I have so much faith and confidence in our country's ability to fix the public education system. And in fact, when I was in DC, oftentimes I would go and give these rousing speeches to luncheons like this about how we could be the best and how every kid could be in an excellent school. And afterwards, inevitably, somebody would come up to me, a very nice person, and say, you know what, you are exciting, you are motivating, you seem really smart, but you are not going to be successful. And I would always say, gee, thanks for the vote of confidence. Why do you think so? They'd say, because schools are a reflection of the communities that they're in. And as long as we have an economic disparity in this country, as long as we have wealthy communities that are well-funded and well-resourced, those communities are going to have good schools. And then we have poverty and societal problems in other communities. Those communities are going to have not so good schools. It's the way democracy and capitalism work. Get used to it, kid. And I never, ever believed that had to be the case, but I never could figure out the right way to sort of communicate something different to people. And it wasn't until I had the very good fortune of meeting Warren Buffett that this all changed in my mind. So for starters, a little Ohio girl never expects to meet Warren Buffett in her entire life. But there I was one winter evening in Omaha, Nebraska. I'm having a steak dinner with Warren Buffett. We're talking about different things, and halfway through the dinner, he looks up at me and he says, you know, Michelle, it is very easy to solve the problems in public education in America today. And then he goes back to cutting the steak. This is one of the richest and most successful men in the world. So I said, super, Mr. Buffett, do you want to tell me what that is so I can go back to DC and implement it? And he said, all you have to do is make private schools illegal and assign every child to a public school by random lottery. So think about this for a minute. Because if we would have done that in Washington, D.C., which means that every CEO's child, every ambassador's child, every congressman's child, and the president's 2 babies all got sent to a random D.C. public school by lottery, which means a huge percentage of them would have been going to Anacostia for school every day, I guarantee you that you would never see a faster movement of resources from one side of the city to the other as you would in that circumstance. And I also guarantee you that very quickly we would have a system of excellent schools. So it is not impossible in my mind. In fact, it is very, very possible if we have the will. So let me give you the 3 things that I think we need to do as a nation in order to fix our public school system and give our kids the education they deserve. The first thing is a very simple one. We have to begin to honor and respect teachers for the professionals that they are. And I say this for a very specific reason, because when I was in DC, people used to stop me on the street all the time and say, oh, you have the hardest job in the whole city. And I'd say, no, I don't. This job is a walk in the park compared to what it takes to be an effective teacher in the classroom every day. When 25 to 125 kids are looking at you every single day and counting on you to get a great quality education, that is the hardest job there is, trust me. And so it is disturbing to me to sort of hear all of the education debates and dialogues that are going on today about, well, you know, because kids are coming from difficult situations of poverty, etc., what can we expect teachers to do? Teachers matter. They matter a whole lot. Now, they can't solve all of society's ills, but can they make a difference for our children? There is no doubt about it in my mind. I'll share with you a very quick story. So I used to like to visit schools as much as I could. And after the first couple of visits that I made where the principals knew I was coming and would have the pet marching band out to meet me and the dance squad and all this sort of stuff, I decided that I would start doing unannounced visits. So on this one particular day, I decided to visit a school in one of the toughest parts of Washington, D.C. And I got there, didn't check in with the office, but I looked across the street. There was a liquor store and a nightclub. As I was walking up the front walk of the school, there were broken beer bottles, cigarette butts, syringes. It was a picture of urban blight. And I stepped into the school and I chose a hallway to walk down and picked a classroom, random classroom, just walked in. What I saw was absolutely amazing. So a teacher bounding around the classroom, 30 kids, eyes transfixed upon her. And it was interesting because I could pick up through context clues that they were reading a book about Greek mythology. And the book was about a group of kids who had traveled back in time, back to the time of Greek gods. And they were at the part of the story where they were trying to figure out, how do I get back home? So the teacher says to the kids, okay, I've created these posters. Each poster is of a different Greek god and what they are the god of. So I want you to look around the room at these posters and tell me, if you were one of these kids and you could only choose one god to help you go back home, which god would it be? So I'm looking at the posters, I get my answer. The first kid raises his hand. He said, I would choose Zeus. Because Zeus is the god of gods. He's the boss of everybody else. If he tells you to do something, you gotta do it. So I think you should just cut out the middleman and go straight to the big guy. A really good answer, right? So I said, okay. Second kid raises her hand. She said, I would choose Hera because she is the god of women, children, and families. These are kids that we're talking about. These are her peeps. She got to take care of them, so I would choose her. That's another good answer. Third kid raises his hand. He said, I would choose Apollo, the god of art, music, and literature. So I'm thinking to myself, okay, kid, that was a total misfire, right? Then the kid goes on to explain. He says, as you'll remember from the book, the children had dug up an old Greek lyre, and they strummed the strings of the lyre, and that's how they got transported back in time. So I figure if they have to go back, it has something to do with the lyre, they should call him the god of music. And I thought, dang, that was good. These kids came up with 6 unbelievably creative and thoughtful answers before someone came up with my ever lame answer of the god of travel. And as I was leaving the classroom, I thought, this is exactly what you want to see in a school. The kids are 100% engaged. They are using their critical thinking and analytical skills. The teacher is facilitating the whole thing. It's beautiful. Walk out of that classroom and into a classroom right across the hallway to the exact opposite situation. So in this next classroom, I almost knocked the teacher down because she is standing at the doorway and she is screaming at the children at the top of her lungs. Everybody be quiet! I've been telling you all morning to be quiet and you're not listening to me and I have no idea why, and this needs to stop, so I am going to count down from 10. And by the time I get to 1, everybody's mouth should be closed. And she starts, 10, 9, and she's flicking the light switch on and on. 8, flick, flick, 7, flick, 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 6. And then she gets down, she's 5, and then she says, I'm waiting. And you're looking at the kids and they're like, we're waiting too for something to happen. I was in each of these classrooms for literally no more than 10 to 15 minutes apiece. And I can tell you that these 2 groups of children, both of whom came from the same downtrodden neighborhood, who were walking into the same dilapidated school building every day where rainwater was leaking through the roofs and ceiling tiles were falling on their heads. Two groups of kids getting a wildly different educational experience because of the adults who were in front of them every single day. You cannot tell me that teachers don't matter. They absolutely do. And we should aspire to nothing short of making sure that every child in this nation has a highly effective teacher in front of them every single day. So that's the first thing. The second thing we have to do after we start respecting and honoring teachers is we have to regain the American competitive spirit. And I say this because, honestly, I think we have gone absolutely soft as a country. We are so busy trying to make children feel good about themselves and feel great that we have actually lost sight of taking the time necessary to make them great. So I will turn the microscope on myself and tell you that I have two daughters of my own, 10 and 14. My daughters play soccer. My daughters suck at soccer. They have, unfortunately, inherited their mother's athletic inabilities. However, if you were to go into their rooms today, you would see trophies and medals and ribbons and plaques. If you came from another country or another planet and you came to my house, you would say to yourself, Michelle Rhee is raising the next Mia Hamm. I assure you folks, I am not. So I tried to talk to my daughters about this. I said, to Olivia, you are not so good at soccer. If you want to become good someday, you're gonna have to put the work in. You gotta, practice 90 minutes a day. You gotta kick the ball up against the wall and into the net and run laps. And even if you do all that, I still can't guarantee you're gonna be any good because you've inherited my genes. And Libby looks at me like I am crazy. Almost as if she wants to go, lady, do you need to see the plaques? Should I bring them downstairs so you know how good I am? And this is in incredibly stark contrast to the country that I am originally from. My parents grew up in South Korea. And when I was in the 6th grade, they sent me there to attend school for a year. In South Korea, much to my chagrin, they used to rank all of the kids in the classroom from 1 to 70. There were 70 kids in the classroom back then. I was number 70 because I was the Korean as a second language kid. But every single kid knew exactly where they stood, and every family knew exactly where their child stood, and it was a matter of personal family pride how high you were up in the ranks. And so if you were number 18, your family was saying, by the end of this quarter, you gotta be at least 15, right? And if you were number 3, you wanted to be number 2. Conceivably, the only kid that should be happy in that classroom is the kid who was number 1. But he was actually the most worried because he's thinking, oh my gosh, here comes number 2. He did better on the test than me. What am I going to do? It was a culture that was based on competition, but also strove for excellence every day. And I guarantee you that we are not doing our children any favors by babying them. In fact, oftentimes people sort of don't like what I say on this topic a lot, and there was one blogger who once wrote, Michelle Rhee is a tiger mom and I feel sorry for her kids. And so I was sort of laughing at this, and my younger daughter came in and she's like, what are you laughing at? And I said, well, this lady says that I'm a tiger mom. And she looks at me and she says, no, you're not a tiger mom. You're more like a gerbil mom. I said, gee, thanks. But here's the bottom line in my mind. We cannot raise a generation of children who are taught to celebrate mere mediocrity or participation. That's not the American spirit. It's not what this country was founded on. What we have to be saying to kids is, this is what excellence looks like. Not everybody is going to get there, but we believe in your potential to do that only if you work hard, you put the time in, and you outperform everyone else. It's not gonna happen just magically. It's not gonna happen just because you happen to be going to school every day. You have to want it and you have to put the time and effort in. And I believe that until we recapture the American spirit, the competitive spirit, we are gonna continue to fall short of those countries that are doing the same. So that's the second thing. And then the last thing, very quickly, I think that it is incredibly important in this country, at this time in this country, that we begin to put aside the partisan politics and start to focus on kids. And the reason why I said, let me tell you a very quick anecdote on this one. I am a Democrat, lifelong, dyed in the wool, always have been, always will be Democrat. And so we Democrats have very strong views about what education should look like and what it shouldn't look like.